It's tabletop time, and today I am going to attempt to play every single Warhammer 40k game. There are 63 of them. My paid leisure time playing video games while Murray and Jen are hard at work is only possible thanks to today's sponsor, MSI, and their awesome Stealth 14 studio laptop. But we've got 63 games to look at today, so let's not waste any time. Now, I already smashed through the retro games in a previous video linked in the card above. If you want a deeper dive into those, check them out there, but I'm going to include them today for completeness. So, lightning round. Space Crusade, published in 1992 by Gremlin Interactive. Space Crusade is the very first 40k game, released on the very current MS-DOS and Commodore 64, amongst other consoles. This game was a fairly faithful digital adaptation of the Games Workshop board game of the same name. Bonus points for this. And then in 1993, Space Hulk was released. Published by EA and based on the Space Hulk board game of the same name, Space Hulk differed from the board game rules with real-time gameplay that was apparently very good for its time, but is now extremely obtuse without a manual and chaotically hard. Followed up in 1995, EA then published Space Hulk Vengeance of the Blood Angels. This is a pretty cool tactical shooter a la Doom with some cool 3D graphics and awesome sprite work. It included fun, fast-paced combat and was brutally hard, continuing the trend of Space Hulk being a grueling experience on and off the PC. 1997 saw Warhammer 40k Epic Final Liberation blast onto PCs with graphics that were already 5 years out of date. But it had some really fun FMV cutscenes and a faithful and fun adaptation of the tabletop epic game turned PC. Final Liberation was actually a solid and well-liked entry into 40k gaming history. Hot on its heels in 1998 was Chaos Gate, which brought the awesomeness of XCOM style squad building and combat to the 40k universe. This game was awesome, from the graphics, the depth of units, and the customizations. For its era, I think this was the perfect genre to mesh with Warhammer 40k. A really solid entry here that would be the second last title in the 90s until 1999's Rites of War. Rites of War had such features as weird, ugly art, ancient Eldar designs that have aged terribly, and it was, in general, a fairly stock standard hex-based strategy combat game. I have very little to say on this one, other than it's not really my cup of tea. We were left with this, the most mid of mid games, until 2003, when the famous game Fire Warrior launched. Throwing Warhammer into the public eye for many, for the first time, Fire Warrior was released on PC and PS2, marking it as the first title on console this century. It would stand alone in this regard for 8 years. Fire Warrior is notable for having hoodwinked many adults into being nostalgic for it and thinking that it has any merit as a game of quality at all. It's terrible, and while some people like it because it's 40k, it has bad game feel, bad graphics, bad audio, bad balance, and bad animation. And before you defend it, just remember that Halo Combat Evolved came out 2 years earlier, and Halo 2 followed Fire Warrior 1 year later. It was pretty bad. Thankfully, the PC elite saved the day in 2004 with Dawn of War. This king of games was a real-time strategy game for PC that introduced the world to the Blood Ravens, the kleptomaniac space marine chapter we all know and love. With a well-written campaign, great missions, and most importantly, addictive and well-made multiplayer, Dawn of War would earn 3 expansions, each adding more units and factions over the years. Winter Assault, Dark Crusade, and finally Dawn of War Soulstorm would round out the title to include almost every faction in Warhammer, except maybe the Tyranids. Besides the dated graphics that this game has, they all still hold up and are fun to play to this day. And then in 2005 and 2006 respectively, Space Hulk and 40k Death and Glory were released for the N-Gage. And while I said I would try to play every 40k game, this is where I draw the line. I'd never heard of the N-Gage before this video, had you? So here are some screenshots. I don't think Space Hulk ever actually got a full release, and there's very little online besides some early review copy. And while Death and Glory did get a full release, I don't think anyone in the world actually owned an N-Gage, so no one played it. Rounding out our older games, we have Squad Command for the Nintendo DS. This I also didn't have access to, but it is the only Warhammer game ever released on Nintendo DS. And broadly, it's a standard action point-based squad strategy game a la XCOM, a la Chaos Gate, a la almost every other Warhammer title on this list. Bonus points for some nice bit crush sound effects. Alright, we're up to date. Now I can actually kick my shoes off and play some games while everyone else in the studio works. So let's go find somewhere more comfortable to do that. In 2009, THQ released Dawn of War 2, the anticipated sequel to the immensely loved and successful Dawn of War. Revisiting this game was a joy. Graphically, it was far superior to how I remembered it, and the leap in quality between Dawn of War 1 and 2 is immediately apparent. Also a real-time strategy game for PC, Dawn of War 2 nevertheless changed a lot from its predecessor. The game moved away from a focus on base building and the horde rush RTS styles of the 90s and early 2000s, and followed the more positioning-based, realistic systems of games like Company of Heroes. There were less units, with more importance being placed on how you used them rather than how many you used. I know personally many didn't like the new feeling of the multiplayer, and my own gaming group stuck with Dawn of War 1 for LANs. However, personally, I found the new single-player experience to be vastly improved, with in-depth campaigns, with character and skill progression rather than a framework for skirmish games. Dawn of War 2 was in almost every way superior to its predecessor, a rare victory for a sequel. It was followed up with the expansions Chaos Rising in 2010 and Dawn of War Retribution in 2011, two full expansions offering new factions, campaigns, and game modes such as Last Stand. Dawn of War 2 would continue the legacy of Dawn of War 1, remaining the absolute gold standard of Warhammer 40k games. 2011 saw the release of Kill Team for consoles. I played this extensively on my PS3. No longer available on any platform, my review is based on past experience rather than a replay. Kill Team was launched with much anticipation. We hadn't entered the era of Games Workshop being known for giving its game IP to anyone who asked for it yet, so there was a lot of excitement with my friend group. It seemed like 40k was finally hitting the mainstream with game releases. While the release would prove to be simple and lacking depth, it was definitely a fun couch co-op top-down shooter to play with friends and fans of the franchise. I distinctly remember not finishing the game though, due to the repetitive levels, enemies, and gameplay eventually running thin. While overall a fairly mediocre entry, at the time hype levels could not be contained, because while we were all tired of Kill Team, the next 40k game was right around the corner, and it was a doozy. Warhammer Space Marine. If you've played any Warhammer 40k game, this is probably the game you've played. Massively popular within the Warhammer fanbase, and even receiving acclaim from outside that niche group, Space Marine was the first 40k game where you truly felt like you got to step into the boots of a Space Marine. Commanding Captain Titus in third person, this hack and slash game brings the immense power and lethality of a Space Marine to the screen for the first time. Tearing through orcs and later a Chaos Uprising, Space Marine didn't break new ground for gaming in general. But what it did achieve was a very fun, engaging campaign with a solid gameplay loop that stood up to scrutiny from franchise fans and non-fans alike. Memorable for all the right reasons, Space Marine likely still sits at the top of anyone's favourite 40k game lists. Sequels were initially planned for Space Marine and Dawn of War, but with the closure of THQ, we will never know what they might have looked like. It is worth mentioning though, both would eventually receive different sequels produced by new companies years later, with Space Marine 2 unreleased at the time of filming. Looking back on the game, it is certainly fun, if simple, but the gameplay has definitely been surpassed by games in similar genres such as Doom 2016. And even Necromunda Hired Gun, a game we'll get to later in this video. Set to follow up on the success of Space Marine, 2 years would pass until the next 40k game, 2013's Space Hulk. Space Hulk showcased lovely graphics, realizing the Blood Angels Terminators fighting Genestealers in the tight confines of a terrifying Space Hulk. Unfortunately, the game received mediocre reviews, including from myself right now. While a faithful adaptation of the Space Hulk board game, that's all it is. The animations are painfully slow and the board game rules are brutal. If you like that, that's fine, but as a video game, it is extremely limited and even more niche. If you want to play through the Space Hulk on PC, this is for you, but if not, this game offers little outside that experience or little to appeal to a wider audience. It is hard. It's so hard. I just give up when I try and play. I am not patient enough to spend 2 hours on a single level. And with that said, I need a break from banging my head against the wall trying to beat Genestealers. If you're a creative at work or a gamer who likes to play on the go, today's sponsor MSI has the perfect machine for you. All the games I've played today have been played on the stylish and sleek new Stealth 14 Studio A13V. Its ultra slim and featherlight 1.7 kilograms is incredibly easy to carry and use on the go. For its size and weight, its power is surprising. With up to an RTX 4070 pushed at 90 watts, my games today ran smooth as butter. Powering the machine is the latest 13th gen Core i7 13700 processor, and it shows with lightning fast response. Where this machine really shines is in its versatility. Perfect for a professional or semi-professional creator who uses their machine both for work and for play. With powerful graphics processing, perfect for gaming, video editing, rendering, or 3D modeling, or any other creative pursuit you can think of. Combined with a gorgeous designer finish and ultra portability, it is perfect for any freelancer. Another concern for laptops for playing games is cooling, but the Stealth 14 has you covered, with a special vapor chamber cooler for the CPU and GPU, helping to manage thermal flow and maximize performance. Overall, I wasn't sure how I'd feel about a smaller gaming laptop with a 14-inch screen, but I did find the reduced weight and noise compared to other gaming laptops I've tried really helped in making it realistically portable, and it didn't hurt my wrist to pick up and carry around. But if you are keen on a larger screen, the Stealth is coming out with a 15, 16, and 17-inch monitor option available soon. If you're ready to get a sleek and professional laptop that can elevate your professional life, that you can also relax and game on, check out MSI. Links are in the description, and a special thank you to them for sponsoring this video. It's been super fun and this is a cool machine. But now I'm going to use this machine for what I really want, which is to play some more video games. Alright, so I've rugged up and gotten some gaming in this unseasonably cold Australian winter, which there's nothing better to do, and I've got to love having a laptop so I can just hang out on the couch and do this. Anyway, where were we? So 2014 rolled around and we had entered a big new era for Games Workshop games. Nobody knew at the time, but this was the beginning of the great IP giveaway. Or as I like to call it, the shovelware era, where over a dozen games would be made and released in 3 years and subsequently disappear from all platforms. As small and newer development companies put their hand out for Games Workshop IP, made something, and then subsequently went out of business. Many of these games are now completely unavailable due to them only being provided on app stores on phones and then being pulled. But let's dive into this morass anyway. And it all started with 2014's Warhammer 40k Armageddon. This game felt like it belonged in the 1990s review. It was barely more advanced than Warhammer Epic Final Liberation. But that said, it was decent for what it was. Unit roster was very comprehensive for the factions involved, and it was fun to see Forge World options that no longer get to see the table, as well as Titans and Super Heavies. It felt like a company doing their best with what they had, and a genuine attempt to make something fitting for the 40k universe. The campaign dialogue is extensive, and despite dated appearances, it's one of the more playable strategy games in the genre. And still available today, which is surprisingly rare. Following Armageddon, Space Wolf also released in 2014, going on to be released for other platforms in 2015, 2017, 2019, 2020, and 2021, attempting to beat Skyrim's record of most re-released game. Space Wolf is a tactical card-based game. Decent gameplay is tarnished by a slightly unintuitive UI, as well as mechanics locked behind missions and once unlocked, not thoroughly explained. The sudden introduction of multiple decks and characters is an immediate and confusing departure from the established gameplay as you progress. Overall, it's okay. Merely okay. The fact that it's still around is a testament to it being an actual game. And then come the lost titles. A swathe of defunct titles or pulled IP agreements, leading to 11 out of the next 12 games being no longer available to play on any platform. Could it be that Warhammer 40k is the cursed IP? Rounding out 2014, CARNAGE released. A side-scrolling hack-and-slash mobile game clicker that is very reminiscent of its era, where runners and idle clickers like Subway Surfer and Temple Run ruled. Players enjoyed the character customization and music, but the gameplay is extremely forgettable. I played this game, but I forgot it existed until I made this video. CARNAGE developer Roadhouse Games is now out of business. Storm of Vengeance was another mobile game that I actually played at the time. A lane-based strategy game where you deploy buildings that spawn units that automatically fight. Centered on the Dark Angels chapter, and once again featuring the Orcs as the primary antagonist, developer Eutechnyx had a disappointing launch, and 19 employees lost their jobs in the following restructuring. Eutechnyx would go on to make exactly one more game before going silent in 2015. Space Hulk Ascension was Full Control's follow-up to their 2013 Space Hulk game, and by all accounts it addresses most of my issues. It became more of a game, taking the spirit of the Space Hulk board game and translating it into PC gameplay rather than directly porting the DICE game. It would also be Full Control's last game. And after its launch, the company downsized and stopped producing games entirely. It was pulled from all sales channels in 2019 when their IP license expired with Games Workshop. 2015 meant chess. And chess means regicide. The regicide game is chess. It's literally chess, but reskinned in Warhammer 40k with guns. Which is interesting because regicide is not actually chess in 40k. It's very close to chess, but they have different elements, such as a circular game board and pieces having different abilities, such as concealed pieces and game pieces like the Divinitat being able to reveal their true identity. These elements are never fully explained in the novels, but it is clear that regicide is a touchstone similar to chess, but not actually chess. Nevertheless, the game regicide it's just chess. Being that chess is well liked and Warhammer is well liked, regicide was popular amongst its fans until its sudden delisting in 2022, likely due to our licensing expiry. Build bases and attack other players in HORUS Heresy Drop Assault! Or don't, because as of April this year, the game has been pulled due to license issues. Games Workshop really seems to be cleaning up what games are available nowadays. Reminiscent of mid-2010 games such as Clash of Clans or Boom Beach, this game had at least some announcement of its imminent removal. And the last few steadfast players were there in the final moments, saluting the universe as the virus bomb that is Games Workshop's legal department hit. Landing somewhere between Space Hulk and Space Wolf, DEATHWATCH TYRANID Invasion was released to a positive reception on iOS, rising to the top of the mobile game deluge. However, sales weren't amazing, and the port to PC received a lukewarm response at best. Shortly after, developers Rodeo Games downsized and ceased production of video games. And in a massive shock to everyone, recently, likely due to license expiry, the game was pulled from all platforms. Next up in the wild world of Games Workshop IP handouts, Legacy of Dawn Herald of Oblivion was a digital game book. That's basically a choose-your-own-adventure book with some game elements. Well received by an admittedly extremely niche audience, Legacy of Dawn was once more pulled recently due to licensing. Now I have to say, I feel good saying that the developer, Tin Man Games, is still making games. It's kind of depressing to dive through the graveyard of passion here, so if you like digital game books, go check them out, I guess. It's not really my thing. Now after the last bunch, it's a good thing to say that 2015 ended with a bang in the form of Warhammer FREEBLADE, a mobile game that actually kills it. Take control of an immensely customizable Imperial Knight FREEBLADE and enjoy this tactical rail shooter. It's entertaining while being casual and deep enough to be enjoyable, with ranked leagues and updates keeping this relevant and available 8 years after its launch. I played this religiously when it came out and was pleasantly surprised to see on my replay that the Knight Styrax is available, and now I really want to grind it. This is actually everything good about a mobile game. It's a passive clicker that isn't overly in your face with marketing, but is also quite fun to burn some time with on a train or waiting for an appointment or whatever. But it was 2016 and it was time to reverse any goodwill that had been made by FREEBLADE. With EISENHORN's XENOS. Remember that game? It was a strange mix of novel and game that somehow failed to do either, with heavily criticized controls, graphics, and a awful PC from mobile port. With questions as to why this was ever even pushed as a mobile game, it's safe to say XENOS is a forgettable entry to the list. Developer Pixel Heroes' latest update, also 2016. Unfortunately, this unpolished product exemplifies this era of Warhammer games. Lots of overreach and ambition with very little experience to back it up, and a hot, fresh slice of IP pie to anyone who wants it. Thanks, Games Workshop. Following EISENHORN was 2016's BATTLEFLEET GOTHIC LEVIATHAN, a mobile game based on the tabletop game of the same name. Very little is available online about this game save for gameplay footage and discussions of its removal from app stores. It was discontinued a year after it was released, and its developer, Grand Cauldron Games, would also cease posting and production at the same time. But then there was the big one, Warhammer 40k Eternal Crusade. I bet you can't wait, people. Yes, that's right, the game that promised everything and delivered almost nothing. After the crushing blow of THQ's collapse and the loss of the Dark Millennium MMO that had been in development, fans were super eager for Eternal Crusade. It was announced and pitched as a large multiplayer open world game with interactive missions and dynamic gameplay, including thousands of players in single battles and maps spanning thousands of square kilometers. Mired with lies, dodgy marketing, and a relentless cycle of promises with pulled back releases, and an incredibly controversial founders pre-funding campaign that looked like it was trying to ape off Star Citizen, Eternal Crusade is arguably the most controversial 40k game ever made. There's a great video called The Fall of Eternal Crusade by Concha worth checking out if you're interested in the full story. It goes for about an hour and it's quite entertaining, but suffice is to say the game we got was not what was promised. We got a multiplayer lobby shooter. That's it. Some people loved it, and that's fine, but a lot of people were angry. Talisman: The Horus Heresy was another 2016 title and another board game adaptation. This one I also could not play due to its license expiring and it being pulled from all platforms. Fans of the Talisman board game series would have enjoyed this game, as it was a Horus Heresy reskin of that popular game. I have played Relic, which is basically a 40k reskin of Talisman, and it's a pretty good game, so I'm sure Talisman: The Horus Heresy was fine. And the last game in our glut of shovelware and broken promises is 2016's Space Hulk. Yeah, again, Space Hulk again. It's just a mobile game port of the 2013 PC game. It's exactly the same game. Alright, so with that done, I gotta make a coffee and get off this couch and be productive by playing more video games. Let's do it. For many at the time, it felt like Games Workshop was just handing out their IP, and that no quality games would ever be made. Thankfully, after years of waiting, some genuinely good titles were about to be launched. Sharing 2016 with many other games, Battlefleet Gothic Armada stood out. While legitimate complaints about the difficulty and level design are fairly leveled, Battlefleet Gothic feels different. It is complete, made with care, and offers the full experience and depth of a single-player campaign and multiplayer missions. Armada delivers the game that is promised, a tactical space battle game in the worlds of Warhammer 40k. And while it doesn't reach the heights of excellence, it is nevertheless a solid game in a franchise that needed one at the time. Smashing into 2017, we have Space Hulk Deathwing, the first game that makes you feel like a Space Marine again since Space Marine in 2011. Play single player or co-op as you explore the grueling depths of a Space Hulk, use different weapons and classes to slaughter hordes of XENOS filth. I had fun on launch with this game playing with friends, yet after years of updates and an enhanced edition, it still lacks what we might call a AAA polish, with typos and bugs fairly frequent, as well as a fairly ugly and basic UI. Deathwing is far from perfect, but it is fun, and like Armada, it feels like a game somebody cared about, worth getting to explore the 40k spaceship environments alone. Next up, Horus Heresy Battle of TALLARN strikes new ground by being a hex-based strategy combat game that is no longer available due to IP licensing issues. It looked painfully mediocre, but thankfully is the last redacted game of the 2010s. The developer Hexwar seems to pump out reskinned hex-based combat games every second week, so no surprises there. But for every Warhammer fan, there is the game that marks the day the hype died. The day that stopped you pre-ordering. The day that killed your excitement for future releases. For me, that day was the 27th of April, 2017. The day that Warhammer Dawn of War 3 dropped. Something about Dawn of War 3 was wrong. From the moment the trailer launched and revealed weirdly proportioned long marines to the first loading screen. Someone who had spent thousands of hours in Dawn of War 1 and 2 as a kid, Dawn of War 3 couldn't help but fall short. The campaign missions are overlong and boring, while the campaign itself is painfully short. The graphics are so dark and grungy as to be difficult to see what's going on. Unit health, numbers, abilities are obtuse and a pain to juggle, and while base building is back, which is good, the better elements of Dawn of War 2, like cover and the Company of Heroes style combat, seems gone again, replaced with bizarre decisions such as upscaled characters and MOBA style combat abilities. It runs poorly, the missions and campaigns are boring, and overall it's a disaster. However, mostly this is due to the legacy it fails to live up to. Standing against the broad range of 40k games, Dawn of War 3 is above average, but for the king of 40k games, that's a long way to have fallen. I never finished the campaign, which says a lot. Next up, and tying in with a narrative campaign setting from 3 years earlier, Sanctus Reach is, you guessed it, a grid-based tactical combat game. Very slow-paced and extremely limited, with Orcs vs Space Wolves as the center of the game. I did want to give a special mention to this one for the horrible dog whistle that is part of the soundtrack, periodically drilling a dentist's drill into my eardrum whenever I think I might be getting immersed. Otherwise, it's fine, I guess. But the lack of depth, story, and campaign make it feel very basic, continuing Warhammer's trend of games that just don't feel 100% finished. And then Inquisitor Martyr launched in 2018, and it's a game that feels like it tries really hard but never quite gets there. That being said, it is pretty good. It's effectively a Diablo-like ARPG that puts you in the role of an Inquisitor. If you enjoy that style of gameplay, there's plenty to explore here. Differing classes as well as heaps of builds, loot, equipment, etc. However, it definitely suffers from some ugly UI choices that make it feel like a cheaper or worse put together game than it actually is. And it lacks that AAA polish. It is definitely 100% an actual game though, which is good. Gladius Relics of War continues the trend of mostly a game, but lacking polish. It's a 4X builder in the vein of Civilization, but with more of an emphasis on combat than trade or diplomacy. Where the game really lacks though is story and campaign. While that isn't alien to the genre, zero voice acting and no campaign missions makes it feel like a multiplayer sandbox built almost exclusively for dedicated fans of the 4X formula, rather than 40k fans in general. Warhammer mobile games have always followed the trends of their time. From runner games like Carnage to base builders like Drop Assault. 2018 brought us Horus Heresy Legions and combat cards. Clearly eagerly watching the success of games like Hearthstone, they thought they'd have a crack at a card-based mobile game. Both are still available to play, so I could compare them pretty directly. Combat cards feels very simple, even using official miniature photography rather than art. A weird decision that makes the game feel even more like a tack-on product. Simple, yet with gameplay mechanics that feel hidden, I did not enjoy or last long into my attempt at this game, though I'm sure some will swear by it. Next to it, Horus Heresy Legions feels far superior. With art and characters from Black Library and complex deck building, this feels like Hearthstone for Warhammer fans. I was shocked to see a Kratos tank when I launched the game, showing that Legions still receive support to this day. Alright, but it is time to head back to the studio and finish my coffee and dive into some more games. The rigors of my work, having to sit on a couch and play video games. It's a tough lot, but someone's got to do it. 2018 was the year of yet another Space Hulk game. Space Hulk Tactics updated the formula with new graphics. However, we had returned to just a direct adaptation of the Games Workshop game. So if you don't like the board game, don't bother. It has shinier graphics than Space Hulk 13, but less innovation than Ascension. This game explains where full control's license rights went. And most people, on Steam reviews at least, seem to like it less than the predecessors, which are both unavailable now. So praise the Omnissiah that Mechanicus also released in 2018. I'm a sucker for a good XCOM style game, and Mechanicus delivers. Explore Necron tombs as you customize a force of tech priests in this tactical turn-based combat game. I particularly love unlocking new and powerful weapons and allies, and bringing the lumbering Cataphront battle servitor into missions is great fun. The voice acting for the Mechanicum binaric data bursts is top-notch, and the vibe is 100% on the money. It's a great depiction of a faction that is often the foil or a side character to a wider plot, and it's fun to see the cult Mechanicum explored in detail. Mechanicum is absolutely one of my all-time favorite Games Workshop games, and one of the few that delivers on the full quality polish that makes it just feel like a fully realized professional game. However, if I could give a minor critique, it is that it is overlong, and eventually the turn-based combat missions with the same enemy types do become a little bit repetitive. And speaking of repeating things that are successful, in 2019, Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 came out, and it modernized the first game significantly. One of the best features of this sequel is the change in gameplay and focus, making it different enough to feel more high quality but also have a more zoomed out game scope, cutting some of the nitty-gritty of ship management and moving to a larger fleet scale. This is both a pro and a con, but ultimately I see it as a great thing because both games are, shockingly, still available for purchase, and these defined differences make each worth playing, if you're into fleet combat. In a way, this reminds me of Dawn of War 1 and 2, both having differences, but each feeling worthy in their own right. Personally, I lean towards the better graphics and clean presentation of Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. And the icing on the cake? More factions to pick from in this new edition. However, there is a caveat. As of my attempt to replay the game for this video, an update has introduced a deadly bug into the game. My game now crashes within a minute on every launch, rendering it completely unplayable. This needs to be addressed and fast, and at this stage I certainly can't recommend the game. Inquisitor Prophecy was the very last game released in the 2010s. But by classic game standards, this is simply an expansion pack for Inquisitor Martyr. The only thing that separates it from being a true expansion is that Prophecy can be played standalone. Adding a new campaign and the Tech Adept class, it allows you to follow the story of an ex-Magos turned Inquisitor as they unravel the mysteries of a powerful secret technology left behind by Xenorites and their ilk. And gameplay is similar to Inquisitor, in fact it's almost identical, but personally I found it to be a little bit more janky, introducing constructs that felt odd in 40k and gunplay that wasn't thrilling. I'd stick to the sword and board with my Inquisitor in Inquisitor Martyr personally. Overall, from a lore perspective, the idea of an Adeptus Mechanicus Inquisitor just seems a little bit weird, and the way it's implemented feels at odds with things I know about the universe, but hey, there might be something I'm missing. and with the 2010s down, it was HORUS Heresy Betrayal at Calth, getting its final release as the first game of the Roaring 20s. And what a flop it was. Released onto Steam Early Access 2 years prior, shockingly, Betrayal at Calth was given a full release in 2020 despite no work having been done to finish it for the entire prior year. Considered abandonware by reviewers, it's a broken game with a terrible frame rate and has been left completely unfinished. It was bizarrely left up for sale far longer than it should have. In theory, it was a digital board game adaptation of the tabletop game, but in reality, it was daylight robbery. It is no longer available as of 2022. Necromunda Underhive Wars yet again followed the 40k cycle of overhype and underdeliver. This tactical third-person turn-based game offers a unique selling point in being able to control your characters in third person rather than a tactical map. The game environments and characters look good, but the gameplay is sketchy, with odd animations, the models clipping and shooting through maps, and slow pacing. Overall, from what I played, this seemed ponderously slow, but also not nearly as bad as reviews have made out. After several updates and DLC gangs, this looks to be a middle-of-the-road entry, which isn't a high bar in the sketchy history of 40k game releases. I will say, if you're a big fan of Necromunda and tactical games, this seems like it might be okay, but to warn you, I did give up on it, so maybe it is a bit slow. Dakka Squadron soared onto phones in 2020 with a PC port following soon after. This was called Flyboys Edition. Reviewing this game was difficult. On PC, it seemed like a simplistic but relatively fun dive into the world of Orc Flyboys. Too basic for a full PC release, with repetitive gameplay that would quickly run thin. But as an app, this seems to be a very good balance. Simple controls and gameplay for that Warhammer FREEBLADE style time killer on public transport or in particularly boring lectures. Unfortunately, for unknown reasons, Dakka Squadron was rapidly pulled from app stores less than 2 years after release, leaving us with the PC port only. It is decently fun though, and who doesn't love some orc voice acting, so I'm gonna have another fly.
Hey Dave, could you work literally anywhere else?
Yeah, I guess some people are actually trying to work here, aren't they? I'll go to the meeting room. Okay, no one's using the meeting room, so it's game time. Aeronautica Imperialis Flight Command was an adaptation of the tabletop game which was released for PC and very short-lived. While it functioned, it was the victim of promised features undelivered and updates being abandoned. It was criticised for its lack of elevation of the material, with no voice acting, little to no music or sound design, and a lack of campaign or story. Similar to actually playing the tabletop game. There's not much more to mention here besides the fact that, as with so many Games Workshop licensed games, it is no longer available for play or for purchase, and the developer also went out of business. It is only 3 years old. In 2020, Warhammer Battle Sister dropped. The first ever built for VR only Warhammer 40k game. Whether VR is a fad or here to stay is not for me to say, but full disclosure, this is also one of the only accessible games on the list that I couldn't play, because I don't have VR. The game focuses on playing as a sister of battle, and for that alone, I've got to give it some cred. It has mixed to positive reviews, and given the small number of titles available on VR, I'd say it has been, by the standards of Games Workshop games, a success. Be a sister of battle, chop up heretics and cultists, and shoot them with bolters, all in VR. What more could you want? But next, Adeptus Titanicus Dominus, an adaptation of a tabletop game with the same name. You will be shocked to learn that Adeptus Titanicus Dominus is no longer available for sale and the developers are now out of business. That's all I have to say about that game. Lost Crusade is a Warhammer 40k mobile game, and it is the best game ever made.
This video is brought to you and sponsored by Warhammer 40,000 Lost Crusade.
Now this is officially licensed IP from Games Workshop, and it features heroes from all over the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And something I noticed, in fact the first thing I noticed when I picked up the game, is the voiceovers.
There is no such thing as an unbreakable.
In all seriousness and honesty, Lost Crusade is perfectly fine. If you like the idle clicker, base builder genre of mobile games for playing on the couch when your partner picked your least favorite TV show, Lost Crusade gets the job done. The wide roster of characters from the 40k universe are a high point, and it looks fairly nice for mobile. That being said, it's a mobile game, so it's limited to the fads and trends of today. Next up, we have Necromunda Hired Gun, released in 2021, and in fact the game that I opened part 1 of my video game explorations in all the way back last year. The game is dripping with amazing 40k design. The art direction and level direction here is awesome. The maps are exactly how you would imagine an Underhive, disgusting, expansive, confusing, and ugly, but in all the right ways. It's basically Doom with a Warhammer skin, expect hordes of enemies and lots of Daco. Unfortunately, bolter ammo is too hard to come by, and bolters are too fun to use. If you like FPS games, it's not perfect with some bugs and definite issues, but for a 40k game, it's pretty top tier. Necromunda Gang Skirmish. Necromunda was all the rage in 2021, and this game wins the award for possibly the shortest lived Warhammer game in existence. It was released for mobile in 2021, and it closed permanently at the end of 2022. It was a mobile service app featuring single and multiplayer adaptations of the Necromunda tabletop game, with notable in-app purchases heavily advertised. It obviously didn't receive enough support or enthusiasm to maintain servers. And then we come to Battle Sector. Releasing in mid-2021, Battle Sector finally achieved what Warhammer grid-based tactical games have been trying to achieve for 30 years. Quality. On this list, there were surprisingly few new games I hadn't played that I was even tempted to continue after my brief play. But Battle Sector is on that list. It's a grid-based tactical game with multiple game modes, beautiful graphics, smooth animation, quality story, and sound design. It looks good, it has a professional and clean UI, and it plays well. After wading through over 50 games with at least 10 in the same niche, it was nice to finally hit the jackpot. Focusing on Blood Angels vs Tyranids, and including Primaris Marines for the first time, the game has gone on to introduce 3 more factions. If you love turn-based tactical games, skip every other one on this list and go for Battle Sector. I will be returning to this when I finish Diablo 4. I do have to make the distinction between army tactics games like this and XCOM-like squad tactics games, and there's a reason for that. Chaos Gate Demon Hunters is that reason. If there was any doubt the 20s was setting a much higher standard for 40k games, Demon Hunters put that to bed. This game is essentially XCOM in all the best ways. It's smooth, professional, has a lovely story and high quality assets. It plays well, and the squad-based tactics genre feels perfectly made for Space Marines, a force so often beset upon by all sides, desperately outnumbered and forced to fight back to back as brothers. A really great quality game for fans of the genre, and shockingly, that makes 2 games in a row I would actually heartily recommend. When we started planning this video, I certainly didn't plan on getting addicted to a mobile game. Unfortunately, Tacticus exists. Heavily advertised to me while I tried to learn Japanese via Duolingo, I had resisted the call of the game, assuming based on 40k mobile game track records it would be average at best. For me, a fan of squad-based tactics games, I was wrong. The marketing isn't in your face and there aren't forced ads everywhere, and you can also free to play pretty well. Although there is of course a grind. Characters are fun and unique, and genuine tactics are involved in the gameplay. The campaigns are surprisingly fun, if extremely basic in plot. I really want the Thousand Suns, and that's what I've been trying to unlock. Overall, I'm enjoying this a lot more than I should. Call it my guilty pleasure mobile game, but Tacticus is pretty cool. But moving off the mobile and back onto the PC, we had Shooter's Blood and Teeth, which released last year. It's a side-scrolling shooter in the style of Metal Slug, and themed heavily around orcs smashing face. It has hammy dialogue and goth rockers smashing out a soundtrack. There's plenty of guns to play with, as well as different classes for more play versatility. But most importantly, the game supports up to 4-player co-op, making it an excellent light and fun romp with friends. As with many other titles from Warhammer, it's simple, but unlike most, it's elegant. There is a clear style and a polish to this game, and it achieves what it sets out to do. Also, the concept of a ponytail squig is brilliant, and I love it. Thank you, Shooter's Blood and Teeth. And on to a game as hyped as Space Marine 2, Darktide. Darktide is in many ways now a controversial game in the Warhammer world. A squad-based co-op shooter in the vein of Left 4 Dead, Darktide was produced by the same devs as the immensely popular Warhammer Fantasy titles Vermintide 1 and 2. With a good track record and amazing previews, this was one of the most anticipated 40k games ever made. However, a transition to a live service model and a game that on launch had fallen short of expectations and promises has left a question mark in a lot of people's minds about whether or not this game is actually good. Personally, I was anticipating like some sort of story or campaign. Even Left 4 Dead has a mission series that follows through a storyline of the players trying to escape, but Darktide focuses on these random missions on the same maps with squads of people, and any semblance of story is just tied to the character progression as you level up, but they all end the same way, and there's no real satisfying conclusion. Instead of this, it's a loot-based grind box where you repeat the same groups of missions infinite times. The gameplay loop is solid, the graphics gorgeous, the theme amazing, yet it seems to have still wound up a disappointment for many. There are a bunch of negative reviews from players on Steam logging 600 plus hours, which to me just seems kind of salty. If you spent 600 hours playing a game, you've probably enjoyed it more than most. Far from perfect, and in my opinion in desperate need of a proper campaign, Darktide is nevertheless a gorgeous dive into the dingy hive worlds of the Imperium. Overall though, I find this style of game quickly repetitive and boring once your friends stop. I think more than anything, Darktide is a game that suffers from overhype and over expectations, and maybe some overly promised features. In reality, the game is basically Left 4 Dead. It's a co-op drop-in drop-out shooter, and it does that well, but it's not really anything else. But this brings us to our final game on the list. Boltgun! Boltgun is a brand new boomer shooter themed around an ultramarine fighting a chaos incursion on a hive world. The genres are a perfect blend. So often players want the power fantasy of lore-accurate space marines brutalizing hundreds of fools. So Doom-like gameplay is the perfect match. The graphics are extremely well done with a fun 3D plus pixel sprite style reminiscent of the classic 90s shooters. Special mention goes to including enemies we rarely see in games. We've got plague toads, we've got Zinch in general, we've got pink horrors splitting into blues and blasting around little brimstones on the ground. It's a nice touch. Overall, it's a game with a clear identity, polish, and a respectably affordable price tag. Recommend if you're into dumb fun shooters. So we can close the book on video games for now. We're caught up. What do I think of it all? Well, there was a lot more games than I ever realized actually existed, and most of them were terrible, which I think we all knew. In general, I think it's a really sad display of Games Workshop handing its IP out to a lot of over-ambitious and enthusiastic companies. I like to think most of them were well-intentioned and their reach basically just outstripped their ability. It's led to a lot of small game companies that have formed and then fallen apart over the course of releasing a game that then Games Workshop has basically just erased from existence. In saying that, it's interesting, as we've gotten to the modern era in the 2020s, it does seem like Games Workshop's tightened its grip around its IP. Most of those games that mysteriously disappeared all happened around 2019 to 2020, and we're now getting fewer game releases of a far higher standard and quality. If you look at the average games released this year versus the last decade, it's pretty hard to say that they're not at least hitting the mark at what they're trying to do for the most part. It's been an interesting journey, and I'm certainly excited to see where it goes in the future. We've got Space Marine 2 right around the corner, as well as Rogue Trader, which looks like a really promising role-playing game. And overall, I think the worlds are just being explored in better ways, and we're going to be able to better enjoy our favorite hobby in the worlds of video games going forward in the future. Hopefully there aren't massive flops and these games do live up to our expectations, and a bit more mainstream appeal means bigger companies making better games. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I wanted to say a special thank you again to MSI for sponsoring the video. Your laptop, the Stealth 14, was really fun to work on. It ran everything super smoothly, and it's like super light and convenient. It's a really cool machine, and we're very lucky to be able to be sponsored by a company like MSI. As it lets us make these kinds of videos. Also, a thank you to our patrons for always supporting us. If you'd like to check out our Patreon, links in the description. That'll be it, and I guess sometime in the next few years, I'll make another video about all the new video games for Warhammer. There'll probably be another 30 of them next year, so wish me luck. I'm very tired.